Part 2. Lower Fire Month, 9th month, 4th day 22:15. Sometime later, although it was still a few minutes before the appointed time, Sebas stood before the main gate. The gate was lattice-shaped, so he could peer through it, but the trees within prevented him from seeing too far inside. "Oh, you're on time, aren't you?" a voice asked hoarsely. Following that, a man stepped out from among the trees. Of course, Sebas had noticed the man's presence from the beginning. That was because he had activated an ability which allowed him to sense all life signs within an area. That said, sometimes it could not detect opponents who were using stealth-type skills, so he could not rely too heavily on it. However, it was still useful to some extent. "This way. Follow me." The man opened the door, and he led Sebas down a path in the yard. Considering this yard was the property of a criminal organization like Eight Fingers, it did not feel particularly gloomy, and the vegetation was neatly trimmed, as though they had a skilled gardener taking care of things. After following the path for a while, a vast space which looked like a trang area unfolded before his eyes. There were several bonfires blazing away merrily, and bright red firelight illuminated the surroundings. There were about 30 people here, with many men and several women among them, and they all had wicked smiles on their faces. Said smiles were crude and intoxicated with violence, certain of the prospect of victory. Sebas looked around him. There was nobody here who could begin to rival him, but he found the 6 arms of which Clem had spoken. One of them wore a hooded robe. The robe was black, stitched with a bright red flame pattern below the waist. Sebas could not see the face under the hood, but there was no trace of life energy wafting out from beneath it. In fact, it was precisely the opposite. It would seem the nickname of Undying was not merely metaphorical, but that this was a true undead being. Hence the name. Their sole female was dressed sheer silks, and looked to be agile. She wore gold bangles on her wrists and ankles, which rang with crisp metallic sounds as she moved. She had 6 scimitars at her waist. The next man was dressed in a cotton suit. He also wore a gold-stitched jacket, a matador's traje de luces, and a vest. His weapon was a thin sword whose blade seemed to be extending from a rose blossom, and it radiated a rose's fragrance. The final man wore a suit of unadorned full-plate armor, and his sword was securely stowed within its sheath. There were 4 of them in total. Their leader Zero was not here. He was probably waiting somewhere to make his appearance. The 4 of them advanced on him, and the others moved to encircle Sebas. "Hey Gramps, I heard you're pretty good, huh? You can send a man flying with just your fists, right? We got to where we were in 8 fingers through our skills. It would be pretty bad if we lost." That idiot didn't realize that, while the slave trading division's on the decline, we can't lose in front of their boss. Actually, at this point I have a question. Succulent insisted that he lost to Brain Unglaeus. Or did he lose to you, but he just didn't want to admit it? Yes. I never fought him directly. I met him once at the house, and the next time I saw him, he was unconscious on the ground. I see. Well, alright, it's no wonder he lost. Considering his opponent was the great Brain Unglaeus, there's no way he could have won with that strength of his. Considering he continued honing his skills after that duel and he's on par with Gaze of Stronov, I suppose it's understandable why he lost. Still, that doesn't mean we can let you off. We'll take care of Unglaeus and the Shiny Princess's lackey later. You'll be the first, you troublemaking old man. We'll kill you first. We have to subdue you with force and kill you. Otherwise we'll be in a bad state. Look over there. As the members of 6 Arms took turns addressing him, Sebas pointed to the 3rd floor of the building. There's bigwigs from all over gathered there. They're here to watch us toy with you until you die, old man. Is the man called Zero there? Ah, yes. A scornful expression appeared on one of the 4. Sebas extended his finger and pointed toward the 3rd floor. He then put his hand down, paying no attention to the confused looks on the 6 Arms faces. "What are you doing?" "Taunting them. Please do not worry about it. Then, where is she? Who's she? His opposition was still sneering at him as they answered his question with a question. Sebes calmly replied, the woman you snatched from the house. Her name is Suer. And if I said she was dead, would you be that kind? Ha, that's right. We aren't that nice. That woman is a present for Coco Doll. She's being well taken care of. I see. I see. Sebes saw one of the four people shift their line of sight towards a certain location in the building. However, what caught his eye was the fact that it was not the place where he heard Suer had been held. That being the case, all he had to do was verify the location. This is a rare occasion, so why don't you all come at once? Letting Zero escape would be troublesome, and it would just waste time. You talk big, human. You must be feeling cocky because you had an easy time with the mooks, huh? But have you seen real power before? Very well said. I wish to take these words and return them to all of you. However, may I ask a question? Why do you think I am weaker than Brain-sama? Don't look down on us. Warriors of our level can tell an opponent's strength on sight. And you look far weaker than us, old man. The other two people, Davernic aside, nodded in agreement. I see. Sebes could gauge his opponent's strength by the potency of their ki. However, much like his other ability, it would be difficult to tell if his opponents were concealing their power with skills or magic. That's why we're giving you a chance. We'll come at you one at a time. So, I am very strong, you know. Sebes flexed his fingers, beckoning them to come at him. Like I said just now, coming one at a time is troublesome. All of you should attack me at once. That way, you ought to be able to last about 10 seconds. Don't underestimate us, human. Davernic's shoulders trembled. Underestimate you? You are the ones underestimating your opponent. My name is Sebes. The person who gave me that name was the strongest warrior. The master whom I serve is the supreme ruler of... Well, there is no point telling you low lives. Alright, I tire of dealing with you. Let us end this. Sebes stepped forward. He had approached the person whose title most displeased Sebes. Undying King, Davernic. His true identity was a naturally spawned Elder Lich. The undead were born from mass death. They were creatures who hated the living and often desired only to end their lives. However, some intelligent undead could rein in their hatred and build relationships with the living. Davernic was one such undead being. The aim of his false life was to ably harness the power of magic and to learn techniques beyond the spells he could use since his genesis. However, even if he wanted to learn said techniques, he could not find anyone to teach him, given that the undead were seen as the nemes of the living. Perhaps if there were other undead like him, in fact, there was a secret society formed of undead magic casters, things might have been different, but unfortunately, Davernic had never encountered such beings. Therefore, he thought of accumulating wealth, and using them to pay the price to have people teach him magic. At first, he had begun by killing and robbing travelers, but then he had been defeated by adventurers who had come to hunt him down. Now painfully aware of his foolishness, he considered a new way to earn a living. Therefore, he concealed his identity and joined a mercenary band. However, someone else learned that he could continuously launch fireballs, and his identity as one of the undead came to light. He was then forced to flee that mercenary band. After that, when he had once again lost a way to generate income, someone found him. That person was Zero. He introduced Davernic to someone who was willing to teach him magic, and paid him appropriately. In turn, he asked Davernic to use his magical powers under his direction. That was exactly what Davernic had hoped for. As long as he could steadily accumulate more magical power, an undead being like himself with an unlimited lifespan might eventually become a being that could eradicate all life. Zero might have been lending aid to a future disaster for mankind. However, Sebes closed in like a storm, his right hand clenched into a fist which he threw in a straight punch. Unable to defend against the strike or evade it, without so much as the time to move, Davernick's head went flying. Davernick's own life was thus extinguished. It vanished without him knowing why or how he had offended his opponent. Unlike how he usually was, Sebas disdainfully said, "Only one person in this entire world deserves to use that title. That person commands incomparable majesty. An inferior undead being like yourself ought to know your place." Sebas flicked his right hand, shaking off the bone fragments stuck to it. As Davernick's body vanished, the many magic items he had equipped clattered to the ground. Even when everyone was frozen in shock, the 6 arms could still move. As expected, they were capable warriors. Only people who had been through numerous life or death battles could do such a thing. Indeed, that was worthy of praise. That was because it proved that their reputation of being the equals of adamantite-ranked adventurers was not for show. After that, Sebas stalked towards that woman. Dancing Scimitar Edstrom. There was a certain magical item property called Dance. As the name suggested, it was an enchantment, which allowed a weapon to move as though it were dancing, allowing it to attack independently. Thus, it was commonly regarded as the best way to increase the amount of one's attacks. That said, this enchantment only allowed for simple movements, and thus it was not suitable as a primary offensive method. At the very most, it was good for sneak attacks or to hamper a foe, and during fierce clashes between warriors of her level, all it could do was get in her enemy's way. Since there was a limit to how much one could enchant a weapon, it was a sensible choice to pick some other effect instead, rather than the dance enchantment. For instance, Blue Rose's Garen used a weapon whose enchantments only increased the damage it dealt. That said, there was no better enchantment for her than the dance property. Dancing weapons moved in accordance with their master's will. However, when their master was involved in a fight for their life, it was very difficult to order a weapon that one was not holding and which was in a completely different location to attack an opponent, unless there was a tremendous difference in fighting strength. Therefore, most dancing weapons could only make simple motions. However, that was not the case for her. She could easily and naturally manipulate her weapons as though they were being held by an invisible warrior, one whose skills were equivalent to hers. The reason for this was due to the unique makeup of her brain. This was because she had been born with a pair of natural abilities. The first was an excellent sense of spatial awareness bordering on the preternatural. And then some people could have their right hands act with complete independence from their left hands without trying. However, her ability in that field was greater than that. Her mind was gifted with an unnatural flexibility. That was her second ability. It would not be unusual for someone to describe her as having 2 brains. This was her ability. If she had only one of those abilities, she would not have been able to control her swords as freely as she did. However, these 2 abilities were united within her. One could call it a miracle. In all likelihood, there was nobody else within the kingdom's 9 million souls who had the same abilities as her. Her scimitars left their sheaths on their own, in accordance with her fighting spirit. All she had to do was focus on defense, while the 5 other swords launched attacks on their own. This was a barrier of blades. Stepping into this cage meant certain death. However, before the scimitars could begin their attacks, Sebas had already entered his attack radius, and he threw a chop with impossible speed. In the next moment, her head fell to the ground. Wreathed in ki, his knife hand was sharper than any blade. Fresh blood spurted from her neck, and her body collapsed a beat later. However, the 5 scimitars still hung in the air. That was because Sebas' chopping hand had been too sharp and too fast for her to feel her own death. She might not even have felt pain. The 5 scimitars, still obeying her will, sliced through the air towards Sebas. However, Sebas ignored those swords, drawing himself and standing in place. He tenderly addressed the fallen head with honest praise. "To think you would continue to fight even with your head severed. I salute your fighting spirit." Her mouth opened and closed. "What are you saying?" I don't understand. However, she had probably sensed something from those words. Her eyes spun madly, and then realized her body was missing its head. Her expression distorted wildly. She blinked several times, and then her eyes went so wide it seemed as though her eyeballs were about to roll out of her head. Impossible. It can't be. It must be an illusion. I couldn't have been defeated. He did nothing to me. I can't move because of some kind of magic. Somebody say something. And then, she finally accepted reality, and despair colored her face. Her mouth opened and closed, and the swords headed at Sebas fell to the ground, never to move again. Come on, attack with me. Let's get him together. A voice which sounded like a shriek came from the man in full plate armor. However sturdy it was, his armor could not protect him from his fear. He had realized not with his logical mind, but with his heart and soul that Sebas had been telling the truth, and that he was currently facing a creature he should never have fought, which should not exist in this world. Take my Void Cutter. He already knew. He knew that he was about to die. He knew that no matter what happened, there was no possible way for him to defeat the man called Sebas. He had not fled because his instincts told him, you won't make it more than a few steps before he kills you. You'll die if you advance. You'll also die if you retreat. That being the case, at least, those thoughts proved that he was still a warrior. The man confronting him, Sebas, narrowed his eyes. That was because he was thinking, perhaps this might be the first enemy whose abilities I have to watch. The person who made Sebas was the world champion known as Touch Me, whose trump card was a strike that cleaved through the very fabric of space-time itself. Of course there was no way the person before him could reach that level, but even an imitation of that technique might be able to hurt Sebas. Void Cutter, Pazillion. His nickname was derived from the fact that he had a mysterious technique where he could draw from a 1-meter-long scabbard and bisect a foe over 3 meters away. In truth, this move did not actually cut through space. The secret lay in the sword. There was a type of sword called the Yurumi. It was a long blade made from a flexible metal which bent easily. The weapon Pazillion carried was an Yurumi which had been so finely sharpened that it could be called a sword of cutting string. Perhaps a metal whip might be a more accurate name. A high-speed draw cut with such a weapon could kill a foe without leaving a mark, only a lingering arc of cold light, thus leading to his nickname. Compared to the rest of Six Arms, this move was more of a trick, but the fact that he could skillfully use a weapon which was so difficult to master proved his incredible warrior skills. If one handed the same weapon to Gaze, even the man hailed as the mightiest warrior would not be able to wield it as well as Pazillion. In addition, his power was not diminished even if one saw through the trick. The frightening aspect of the whip lay in the ridiculous speeds its tip could reach. Seeing and then avoiding it was very difficult. No, it was almost impossible. It was an ultra-high speed slash. What difference was there between an attack which humanity could not respond to and cutting through the air itself? However, the tip of the sword, the leading edge of that high-speed attack, was caught between two fingers. So casual was that movement that it looked like something which had been picked up off the ground. Sebas carefully examined the metal between his fingertips and arched an eyebrow. What is this? And to think you called it cutting through the void. Yard. With a strange bird-like cry, a rapier lanced out at Sebas. 1,000 kills, Mombist. His main weapon, Rose's Thorn, was enchanted with two magical properties. The first was flesh grinding. In the instant the sword struck its foe's body, this fearsome magic would twist the surrounding muscle and tissue. The effect was to rip and tear at the flesh around the injury site, leaving hideous wounds. The other was Master Assassin. That enchantment enlarged wounds and made even the slightest scratch a severe injury. Those two abilities were vicious enough, but there was one more ability on top of those. It was not a magical power but poison. The tip of Rose's Thorn was smeared with a lethal concoction of many poisons. Momvist had prepared this because he was not originally a warrior, but more of an assassin. Since he wielded his sword to slay his foe, he had assembled this combination with the objective of killing his enemy within a short period of time, by any means necessary. Indeed, even a single scratch could be fatal. Without the proper countermeasures, even Gaze of Stronov and Brain Unglaeus would perish beneath his blade. However, there was a weakness among all this. Since he relied on his ability to win by causing a single scratch, Momvist's swordsmanship was subpar. However, his lunges were the real deal. His lightning thrusts were arguably superior even to those of Gaze of Stronov. In other words, this was the strongest stab in the royal capital. And then this move was further augmented by many martial arts, almost as many as the former Black Scripture member Clementine. However, Sebas did not dodge it. He did not need to dodge it. Momvist, who had made that thrust with all his might, could not bring himself to speak. Rose's thorn, a vicious weapon that could kill with the slightest scratch. He saw Sebas blocking it with his finger. Indeed, Sebas had halted the tip of the rapier with the pad of his index finger. What? Momvist blinked repeatedly, so much that it seemed unnatural. Only after that did he realize that it was not an illusion, that he was not dreaming, and then he managed to gasp a few words out. That was the only thing he could do. This made no sense at all. His experience told him that the fleshy pad of a finger could not possibly stop a thrust which could even pierce steel. Yet, what he saw before his eyes was reality. Malvist could not budge an old man's gently raised finger with all his strength. Rose's thorn bent. He tried to pull the rapier back to try and strike somewhere else, but before he could do so, Sebas had pinched its tip between his thumb and index finger. That immobilized the blade. Before him stood an immovable mountain. He saw that his colleague was also desperately trying to pull his own sword back. Amidst this situation, a voice of iron rang forth, cutting through everything. "All right, my turn." In the next instant, Pazillion's head exploded. An attack like this could be considered quite rare coming from Sebas. Until now, he had been using proper technique, but this blow had been born of thoughtless anger, punching off his opponent's head with sheer brute force. He shifted his gaze to the right hand, which he had extended toward the now disintegrated head. His white glove was flecked with spots, and the stench of rusted iron wafted forth. What a gaffe! He let go of the rapier and used the fingers which had held it to peel off and discard the blood-stained glove. In the instant that it hit the stone floor, Momvist hooked it away with the tip of his slender blade, snatching the glove away. Perhaps Momvist was very confident that he had been as swift as a shooting star in the night sky, but to Sebas it was so slow that he wanted to yawn. He could have shattered the rapier, or stepped forward and explosively decapitated his opponent, or done many other things to take his glove back. However, he simply could not understand what his opponent was aiming for. Confused, Sebas did not make a move but directly asked, "What are you trying to do?" "This is it. This must be the magic item that's making you stronger." It was merely a glove made out of cloth. His voice sounded like a broken gong. Foam flecked the corner of his mouth. His eyes were bloodshot. Momvist's mind was probably half lost in a world of madness. Having witnessed an unbelievable sight, he was desperately scrabbling for some reason to explain what he had seen. "You need only acknowledge my strength. Why are you thinking like this? Although you may do so if you wish." Sebas threw a punch at the man whose face was split by a grin. After Momvist crumpled to the ground, his head blown to smithereens, all that remained was silence. Sebas blew on his fingertip, as though it had been stained with something. However, the protection of his iron skin had prevented him from taking so much as a scratch. In any case, I could have settled it in 5 seconds if that Void Cutter title had not put me on my guard. Being able to last 20 seconds is quite praiseworthy. After that, Sebas gave an order to the predator who was preparing to seize the people within the building, the ones which he had pointed out just now, who had witnessed this tragic scene from the window. Solution: imagine they possess useful information, so do not kill them. Now then. He glanced icily at the people surrounding him, all of whom were frozen in place. 10 seconds for the rest of you.